Let me all welcome you who are here at this webinar. Please mute yourself if you are not muted yet. My name is István Hegedűs and I am the chairman of the Hungarian Europe Society. And today, at this webinar, which is a second debate of a series organized by our Hungarian Europe Society and supported by the US Embassy in Hungary. During this webinar, during this second debate, we will talk about security and defense, certainly in the frame of transatlantic relations and transatlantic ties. The first debate was about the media, the social media, which was recorded, so you might actually listen to it on our YouTube channel, which is on our website. And this one will be also recorded, so it's an on-the-record discussion. So please be aware that we will not edit it at all. But what you are saying will be recorded and might be quoted in the future. So this debate is certainly a very current issue, what we will cover today, since the US elections, the presidential elections has changed our world a little bit. We will discuss it, how much this change on the top of the US political system actually influences our future, especially in the sphere of security issues and defense, NATO, and the capabilities of the European Union to create a sort of strategic autonomy or European sovereignty. So let me introduce our three panelists, first of all. Hajnalka Vincze will be the first speaker. She's a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute in Philadelphia. After her contribution, the second speaker will be Charles Kupchan, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and also professor of international affairs at Georgetown University in the United States, in Washington. And thirdly, it will be Thibault Muzergues, who is the Europe Program Director of the International Republican Institute, which is an American institute certainly, but he is presently in Italy. Usually, I guess he is mostly in Bratislava, not so far away from Budapest. So what I would suggest for all of our three panelists to speak about in about eight minutes, because we want to have a long phase for questions and comments and debates. Actually, I have also invited Veronica Anghel. She's a research fellow at the European University Institute in Florence, and I will ask her to follow up after the three panelists with her views to catch up with and to share her views about all the issues what the three panelists have already said by then. So without any further delay, I would like to give the floor to Hajnalka, who is an old friend of mine and an old friend of the Hungarian Europe Society. You already actually made presentation for us more than 15 years ago. So it's a great pleasure to have you back. And you also participated in our last conference just a couple of weeks ago, which was also on Zoom, an online conference on the challenges of the 21st century, and which can be also listened to because it was also recorded and it's on our website. So Heini, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, István. It's a pleasure to be here. And thanks to the Hungarian Europe Society for this timely event on this very current topic. And I would like to start by saying how much I appreciated reading Charles and Thibault's essays, full of insightful remarks and very thought-provoking reasonings. A real pleasure to read and to reflect on. They also sent me in kind of a soul-searching mode. Am I really that pessimistic on transatlantic relations, as it seemed sometimes from the feedbacks? Honestly, I never thought so, but I have to admit that especially these days, I do have a kind of a Groundhog Day feeling in transatlantic relations. You know, this movie with Bill Murray, where the main character wakes up to the same day every day with the same situations, same dialogue, same events. And I do have feeling right now. I understand the celebration in the overwhelming majority of the transatlantic community over Joe Biden's win and what it means for appreciating allies and renewing commitments. But it is also true that I can't have but remember other times, other extraordinary celebrations of the so-called renewing our transatlantic relationship, mending the relationship, more listening on one side, more sharing of the burden on the other. And each and every time this was followed by disappointment to the same extent. And then came another celebration, another disappointment, and so on and so forth. So this is what I call the roller coaster matrix in transatlantic relations. In a way, I would say that staying on this roller coaster for so many years is a testimony to the resilience of transatlantic relations, for sure. However, it doesn't mean that the ride is healthy, and it doesn't mean that it can go on forever. So what my main concept in what I would like to submit to you is that, in my eyes, the fundamental feature of these transatlantic relations, namely asymmetrical dependence, is the problem in the relationship. And with a combination of external and internal pressures, it means that it puts the entire transatlantic relationship more and more at risk. We all know that Brzezinski called one decade after the fall of the Berlin Wall, talked about Europe as being an American protectorate with allies looking like vessels of ancient times. The French diplomacy likes to take up this word. Most recently, in the Macron doctrine interview, Emmanuel Macron came up with the same word, Europe as not being vassals to any outside power. So, but he did it, the French president did it in order with the intention to wake up European partners, to wake them up to the need for European autonomy, for a rebalancing of the transatlantic relationship. I'm sure that over the course of the next hour or so, we will have plenty of time to discuss European autonomy. So I would just revert for a very short time back to the original theme of my essay, so the Biden opportunity and its limits, where I tried to point out that however we celebrate and there is a change in tone and there will be a huge change in the jovial ambience in transatlantic relations, it won't necessarily last. The disagreements are there, and what is, in my view, the main problem, the imbalance in transatlantic relations, is there and will be staying there and will be poisoning transatlantic relations with each and every disagreement, creating more and more resentment on both sides. And it doesn't mean that we don't have a couple of very peaceful months ahead of us. So we do. There will be a big effort to approach the positions. Europeans will certainly make concessions, if only out of gratitude for not having to deal with President Trump anymore. So, but these concessions, in my view, again, risk to aggravate the problem. So whenever Europeans make these concessions to accommodate, or some would say to appease the American side, it leads to more and more resentment, more and more imbalance. So behind the happy family reunion, which will be there and which will be a pleasure to watch for anybody who is adamant on keeping transatlantic relations going and in good shape, there will be pressure on Europeans, either from the American side, either because they interiorized these pressures to make concessions on issues where there will be disagreement, like extraterritorial sanctions, NATO's evolution, and so on and so forth. I just pointed out two concrete subjects in my essay, which is Nord Stream 2 and the European Defense Fund. I think that there will be like a litmus test of how much European concessions and accommodations is going to lead us, and how much imbalance they will create. These are like these two issues will epitomize the importance of autonomy, and it will be very interesting to watch how Europeans will behave on those. I'm looking at the clock right now, so I try to keep it as brief as possible. So I won't, again, overemphasize autonomy, but I would like still to remind, to just note and point out that the issue of autonomy have been setting the pace of Euro-American relations for the past decades. Every time the French-led autonomist line got a momentum because of outside events, end of the Cold War, Kosovo, Iraq War, then it was in one stage with Americans behaving, again, with my Groundhog Day analogy, having the same discourse on both sides of the Atlantic. And every time, as it is probably be the case now, every time the NATO primacy camp has the wind in its sails, we will see the same discourse of we want a stronger Europe, which is complementary to, but not autonomous from the United States and NATO. And I would say that behind these fluctuations, the fundamental positions remain the same, and these positions are characterized on the US side by a remarkable consistency with the stronger Europe spending more on defense, but definitely not autonomously, and on the European side by an equally remarkable ambivalence. Most Europeans consider dependence on the United States as a very, very comfortable position. They don't have to deal with power relations. They don't have to take responsibility for their own defense. They can dwell on this pacifist ideology. So it's very, very comfortable. However, the past decade showed them that it's very uncertain and it's linked to conditions. So my final remark would be that I think coming back to the present moment with the new Biden administration, waiting for the new Biden administration, Europeans would be misguided to give up the ambition of autonomy. We saw a lot of signs in this direction, and we saw the Macron interview as a preemptive strike to actually avoid that from happening. So Europeans would be misguided, and they would miss, and we all would miss, an unprecedented opportunity to put the transatlantic relationship on a more equal footing. This is going to be an American administration with highly skilled professionals who would actually obviously defend American citizens' interests first, but who would not have a confrontative, conflictual approach to allies, quite the opposite. So if we could get out of the roller coaster and take it on a rational basis and say that we can converge on most issues, and where we cannot, there is no threat and ultimatums on one side and no appeasement and self-censorship on the other, then we would come to one day might come when Europeans would be allies out of strength and not allies out of weakness, to quote excellent Corey Sheikh from who was at the White House. So allies out of strength, and the only way to me goes through autonomy.
Okay, thank you very much, Heini. If I may, I would emphasize that maybe one issue is pessimism, but actually that's not maybe not so important. What is maybe even more important, whether the Europe or the European Union as such has its capabilities to create its own autonomy, based on European so-called sovereignty. And would it harm transatlantic relations, this sort of autonomy, or we need a sort of different balance? And maybe Charles and later Thibault will have different views. So I suggest to have a real debate on this issue, and especially because Heini mentioned a lot of disagreements between the two sides on the Atlantic and on the European side, between two partners. And we know that with the defeat of Trump, actually Trumpism is not over on the one hand, and maybe what you also emphasized, that these differences were present already before Trump. So there is maybe no way to normalcy. So my question goes to Charles first. Is there a way back to normalcy, or there was nothing like normalcy before? The floor is yours. You have also 8 minutes. Charles, please.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Istvan. Thank you for organizing this. And thanks to Thibault. And I don't want to mispronounce your name. Do we call you Heini?
That would go well.
Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. For really excellent memos, and Heini for your great opening remarks. I'll be very brief and make 3 observations. You know, the first observation I would make is that, especially for those of you who are not in the United States, I know Heini is, many of you may not be. This has been a very strange 4 years. And a very distressing 4 years. I'm a Democrat. I worked for Joe Biden. I like Joe Biden. I'm delighted that he won. But I have to say, I am much more exhausted and traumatized than I am elated, because you know, I have not recognized my own country for 4 years, and we still have in the White House an individual who has yet to recognize that he's lost, and that it's time to move on and to facilitate as effective a transition as possible. And so, you know, we've had an emergency here, and I think that it was a near-death experience, in the sense that had Trump won, I would worry deeply about the future of American democracy. And so for the foreseeable near term, I think this is a country that will be heavily focused on the domestic front, on fixing the underlying problems that led to the Trump era, addressing the fact that 74 million Americans voted to re-elect Trump, and you know, in some ways, I think, you know, the Trump era is we should draw important lessons. We should learn from the experience, and for me, the kind of big lesson is we need to embrace policies at home and abroad that more directly speak to the uncertainties, the fears, the dislocations of America's middle class. And this is not an American problem. This is also a European problem. And we know that because we see the populism on both sides of the Atlantic. And so I think you can expect a Biden administration that, at least for the first year or two, is heavily focused on the pandemic, on stimulus, on getting together investment in infrastructure, on worker retraining, on getting the country back on its feet. Because without those steps, I think it's safe to say that Biden will be a brief hiatus from the polarization and the angry populism that we've been living with. What does that mean for foreign policy? For me, two main things. One is a continuing retrenchment from the Middle East. I don't think that Biden is going to reverse what Trump has begun. I think it'll be handled better. There'll be a diplomatic strategy rather than announcing the departure of US troops by tweet. Biden will actually discuss the issue with the Pentagon before he makes a decision. But the general trend of policy will be the same. The American people have had it. They're done with Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya. It's cost trillions of dollars, thousands of lives, and it's made the region worse. The second observation is I think you'll see continued pressure on China on trade. To the degree that there is a big trading dimension to the suffering of America's middle class, it's China. It's not Canada, it's not Europe, it's not Brazil, it's China. And so a lot of the problems we have here are due to technological change and deeper shifts in the economy, the rise of the digital era. But I do think that we'll continue to see a lot of pressure on China on the trade front, but more working with allies rather than slapping tariffs on allies. My second observation is that, and here I think I probably disagree a little bit with Heine. I think there will be a serious consequential rebirth of transatlantic harmony that is consequential. Biden is an Atlanticist. Biden has NATO, the Atlantic Partnership, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, Balkans. It's in his bloodstream. That's who he is. He cares deeply about it. He's spent his career worrying about the transatlantic partnership. And so there really will be a sense of we're coming back together. We are friends. We are teammates. We are going to work together. And I think that in some ways, I would disagree with the idea that Europe is going to be demoted and that there will be a drift to East Asia. Yes, the key geopolitical challenge of the next couple of decades is the rise of China. But precisely because the Western world has shown itself to be so fragile, so vulnerable, we're in the middle of Britain bouncing out of the European Union, right? I think this is going to say to Biden and to the people around him, we need desperately to make sure that the Atlantic community of Western democracies is rock solid. And so I think you will see not a demotion of Europe. On the contrary, Europe is going to rise as a focal point of American diplomacy and American engagement precisely because of the period that we've just gone through. My final point, I agree with Heine about the need for Europe to become more capable. I would disagree with her on the terminology. This is not about autonomy. This is about capability. And I found Macron's speech to be unhelpful because it was unrealistic. Europe is not going to be autonomous for the foreseeable future. Europe needs its American partner. But the best way for Europe to keep the United States engaged is to get better, to be more capable. And so my plea here is stop arguing about autonomy and resisting the US-China duopoly. Enough theology, enough rhetoric. Just go out and build more capability. Rationalize your defense policy, pool your sovereignty, invest in defense resources. We will figure out we will figure out whether to call it an EU mission, a NATO mission, a coalition of the willing, an ice cream mission, an apple pie mission. I don't care what we call it, right? The key is we need Europeans to be able to shoulder more responsibility, to be a better partner. And when you do that, the United States will be a better partner and pay much more attention to you. So my plea would be, let's stop arguing about strategic autonomy and Europe becoming an independent player. And let's discuss when and how Europe can become a partner that shoulders more responsibility as a strong pillar of the Atlantic community.
Thank you, Charles. Thibault, I think your position is closer to Charles, but I want to ask you what you think about Europe's own independent role, maybe in the neighborhood of Europe, where maybe the United States might not be so interested, let's say in the case of the Middle East, I mean mostly Turkey, or maybe Ukraine. So, or Libya, where what Charles mentioned, that people, Americans, think that it's waste of time and a waste of people instead of, you know, democracy export anymore. So the floor is yours. This was just another idea maybe to be discussed.
Thank you, and I have the challenge to put an answer basically to all the great stuff that both Charles and Hajnalka have been saying in just 8 minutes. So that's going to be a challenge. A few very quick things. First of all, I'm speaking in my name only here, not in the name of IRI. I just wanted to make this sure this is me speaking and not the organization that I'm part of, and which I would love to represent, but I will not represent it, to have more freedom of thought here. There's a couple of things that I think we need to talk about, and my position is actually maybe not closer to Charles, but probably between Charles and Hajnalka, and my position is also that of a European who cares greatly about the transatlantic relationship. The first thing I would like to say is that the transatlantic partnership or the transatlantic relationship was never and will never be a smooth ride. I mean, from Charles de Gaulle's behavior in the 1960s, which, you know, you can be a critic of or not, to the Ostpolitik in the 1970s, to, you know, the spying scandal, the NSA scandal in the 2010s, which happened during the Obama administration, to the, you know, the free riders of Britain and France in Libya. I think, you know, the idea that somehow there was a sort of paradise lost of the transatlantic relationship is in some ways a myth. There were points in which it was better. There were points in which it was worse. The reality is also that, as Heini said, that the transatlantic alliance may not last forever. That's a reality. Alliances in history. This is one of the longest alliances that we've seen in history. That's I find it fantastic. But to think that it will last forever by principle, I think is wrong. That's one thing I wanted to say to start with. Now, when we talk about an asymmetric relationship between Europe and the United States, I agree with Charles. I mean, this is something that is going to be happening and to be continuing in the long term. America is much stronger economically. It is much more. It has much more. It is much more united than Europe will be, and in some ways, and I will draw a parallel here, which may or may not be interesting. It resembles the relationship between Germany and Austria-Hungary before the war. before the First World War. What we don't want this to become, and unfortunately this is what it may become, is that it becomes the relationship between Germany and Austria-Hungary during the war, in which there is complete dependence, in which basically militarily Europe cannot do anything without the United States, in which there is frustration that mounts to the extent that basically we go on a not on a collision course, but basically both countries do not understand each other, and there is one domination that basically makes everybody unhappy. So that, I think we can agree that this is not what we want, and we know that how the alliance between Germany and Austria-Hungary ended. We do not want that to happen, also because we know that Austria-Hungary was the one that actually exploded in the end. So now, having said that, I think the question is, how do we achieve a more balanced relationship? And here, I guess the idea of strategic autonomy, of building capacity, is where it, where we come to the debate. The problem is that you can talk about strategic autonomy however much you want. The reality on the ground is that Europe needs America to guarantee peace, not only with the outside world, but peace on the continent. Okay, I think with what we're seeing going on in Central Europe, with two countries that I will not name, but two illiberal democracies that I will not name, but I think everybody will know who that is. The territorial issues could very well come up again in the area, but also in Western Europe, also in Southern Europe. You have countries like Italy that could become extremely weak in the future. Spain is also another one that could become extremely weak internally. The reality is that there are two things putting us together right now: the European Union, which is a union, primarily economic union, that is trying to become political, but that is finding it very difficult to become political, and NATO, which basically brings our armies together. So for me, the idea of an autonomy, of a strategic autonomy of the EU that would somehow puts itself outside of NATO is a complete charade. This just cannot happen. Europe has the Pax Europea has depended for at least the past 30 years, and actually when you talk about Western Europe, for the past 70 years, on the Pax Americana. So if right now, if the Pax Americana goes, it is extremely likely for countries in the Baltic states for sure, but I think also for other countries inside Europe, that the Pax Europea will go as well. So how do we get to a balanced relationship, to a more balanced relationship, how Europe builds its own capacity, and then can go back to the Americans and say, right, we have a fundamental disagreement on your policy in the Middle East, and we need to do something about that. Then you can have a negotiation. Right now, there can be no negotiation because Europe simply does not have any capability to do things on its own. And I think the best example was Libya, where the French and the Britons decided to go on their own, to get there alone, with American reluctant backing, with Germany not being happy about it at all, with also Russia not being happy at all. And the French and the Britons, basically, once they got rid of Gaddafi, did not have the capacities to ensure peace in the area, or to ensure even a presence. At least the Americans had a presence in Iraq. So I think we should put first things first, and building capacity before we talk about autonomy, I think would be a good idea. And then there is also the idea of the goal, and I think Charles mentioned it before. The French view of strategic autonomy is that Europe should build its autonomy to become a big France and project power outside. Germany's idea of strategic autonomy is that to build autonomy to be left alone. And I don't think any of these ideas is actually working well. I think the idea is for Europe to build its autonomy to be able to control what's going on in its immediate neighborhood, which frankly, America does not necessarily care about. I mean, America would be happier that the Mediterranean, or the Eastern Mediterranean, would not be a problem right now. America would be happier if Europe could contain Russia on its own without America having to somehow intervene. America has bigger problems right now. I think also the idea of strategic autonomy with this idea of a sort of European bloc that would be between America and China is complete nonsense. For the very good and simple reason that we've been there before. In the 1950s, in the 1960s, if you look at the debates around the European community of the European defense community, the debates between France and Germany about about the European foreign policy, there was already this idea that Europe needed to be its own player between America and the Soviet Union. Well, guess what? Europe got caught up in the Cold War, because that was the reality of the principles of power made it that there were two blocks and you had to side with one. You could take distance with one superpower, but you could never really completely leave the family. Even in the case of the West, where the relationship was actually much more friendly and much looser between America and Western European countries than in Eastern Europe. So I think we need to drop the semblances. We need to drop the myth and get to a realist position. There will not be a Europe between America and China for the time being. Europe needs to be partnering with America to contain China, because it's also in its interest. And I think I completely agree with you, Charles, that it is also in the interest of European workers, not only of European or American elites. So I think we need to have I don't think we need to have a debate on the long-term idea of building resources, of building something that will be an autonomy. I think Americans need to be ready that the moment that the Europeans will, if ever they do, build autonomy, there will be disagreements, and notably on the Middle East, that are going to come to the fore, and there we will need to have serious discussions about it. But we really need to put first things first, and first do the work of building up our capacities before talking about anything like autonomy.
Okay, thank you, Thibault. That's clear. Your position is crystal clear. Now, what I would like to do to give the floor to Veronica, because actually she has to leave around 7, and she's the 4th contributor, sort of. So, Veronica, without any further delay, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Istvan, and the wonderful panelists. I suppose I'm here to give some thoughts on what the Biden re-election also means for Central and Eastern Europe. And these are two major, it's almost like a case study of where this agenda is going to go. And there are two major defense aspects that will connect the Biden agenda to Europe and to Central and Eastern Europe. And the first is NATO, like the panelists mentioned several times. And the second, I mean, there are several, but these are two main points I just want to make to complete what the others have said. So the first is NATO, and the second is the Biden self-assumed agenda to rekindle the role of the US as the bearer of the flame of democracy, as the promoter of liberal values, to bring back the idea of liberal democracy within the agenda of the US. Now, on NATO and defense, I could not agree more with Heine that ideally autonomy would be great. However, the reality is that Europe depends on the US for its defense. We've spoken about this before. I want to take a lot of time. I used to work on these issues as a foreign affairs advisor for the Romanian presidency. And this is where Charles made an excellent point. You know, Europe has to be better. There has to be a more responsible partner. That's what he said. So it's quite correct that the Trump presidency was a stress test for the US-NATO relations, but the role of the US within NATO is arguably the most binding and more straightforward transatlantic strategic partnership. And then Trump's predecessors, including Obama, pushed for an increase by Europeans on defense spending. And this is the part about responsibility. So there continues to be this frustration with the slow pace at which NATO members increase defense spending to reach the 2% of the GDP that they guaranteed that they would give towards NATO. But you know, Biden called as well in his manifesto, in his election manifesto, that NATO members have to recommit to their responsibility. So I think that was a very good point that the panelists made. But it's also a big deal because, like Obama said, a strong belief that NATO nations never stand alone is probably going to transpire in Biden's agenda as well. And that is a major difference from the credible Trump idea that the US could also withdraw from NATO. So I mean, we'll dodge that bullet, but these countries will also have to move the needle of defense spending. However, it's highly unlikely that they will ever be autonomous. There are other aspects such as intelligence collaboration, partnerships in different areas, cyber security, where the EU and the US could work greater, but that is also a disproportionate collaboration. And secondly, I'll be very fast, the part of democracy and recommitment to liberal values. So right now we have autocrats within the European Union. It's Poland, it's Hungary, I can name them, Thibault avoided that, who are given equal status by the EU and the EPP to shape the rule of law and the understanding of what democracy is within the EU. And the European Union is really not standing up to what's happening right now. I know that István and the Hungarian Society put up a great rule of law manifesto, and many are talking about this. And still, I mean, the reactions are quite underwhelming. Also in Eastern Europe, this connects a lot with corruption. Biden also made this great point when he visited Romania in 2014, I think, and that was a great speech when he connected corruption with subversion of democracy and national security. So if we talk with defense and national security, it's like Charles said, I mean, he knows the region. However, he will be involved in internal politics, and will have to convince Americans that the isolationist past is not in their self-interest. And I will conclude with this. I think that we should discuss his choice of Antony Blinken as Secretary of State. Clearly, he wants a strong ally in this position of America no longer being isolationist, because if we look at Blinken's positions on different issues, intervention in other areas, because of the idea that the US also has a humanitarian role, although it's not necessarily in its interest to intervene directly, we can see that probably Blinken is going to move the agenda more in this direction. And it's also a great choice because everybody expects the Secretary of State to speak for the president, right? So it should be a very close relationship, and Biden and Blinken have had a close relationship for many, many years. So I think that is a place where we could look at for some sort of confirmation that the EU will reign high, Europe will reign high on the Biden agenda. But I mean, if we look at what's happening in the US, it's very likely that he, as a president, will be engulfed in local issues. So his team is very important for us to understand how he will get Europe on his agenda. Thank you.
Very nice. Now, I would like to suggest to stay for a moment in Central and Eastern Europe, and before Veronica, you have to leave, because what you mentioned at the end, especially about Antony Blinken, there is a hope in Hungary that because of his father's being ambassador to Budapest, and it was portrayed as a sort of Hungarian guy in the US administration. So there is a special hope on the liberal side of the political spectrum that the new US administration will keep on, or maybe keep on a bigger pressure on the current Hungarian autocrat, as you said correctly, and probably also on Poland. And I would like to ask all the others what you think. And Veronica, before you leave, please also make your comment if you want. Any of you, Charles, Thibault, and Heini, would like to comment on this very special issue, and then we can go back to the bigger picture if you want. Any comments from you? Who would like to start? Heini, please go ahead.
So as I tried to write in the essay, there is no doubt about the deep conviction of the new administration to conduct a more value-based, democracy-promoting policy, which raises great expectation in some parts of Europe and especially in some countries. And I also try to emphasize that this is not just campaign slogans. So there is a deeper movement in this direction. For instance, at the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, the US delegation for the 70th anniversary of the alliance submitted a report which actually suggested to build or to create a democracy resiliency center within NATO to monitor member states' internal domestic developments in this regard. However, to come back to my cynical side, I would say that definitely we will see salutary welcome discourses and encouragements. I do think that that realpolitik is not far away and is never far away. So the most important priority, very, very understandably, for the US administration is going to be how to contain China, how to isolate Russia, and how to make in a way that Europe stays in line and can be enrolled in these two on these two fronts. So I would say, very, very cynically, that as long as illiberal NATO member states align themselves on these and are good partners on isolating Russia, containing China, I don't see much interest in their domestic policies, at least not translated into actions. However, if their policies towards China or Russia are not meeting these US expectations, then domestic politics and values can come to the forefront and can draw more attention.
Yeah, very clear. Charles, please, what do you think?
I basically would agree with Hajnalka with the caveat that Biden will speak up. He is not going to be someone who shows favor to Kaczynski and Orban and Salvini and Putin and El-Sisi. He's going to be the opposite. He's going to be someone who will be quite outspoken about illiberal tendencies and governments that violate the rule of law. But I would agree that in the end of the day, he will be a pragmatic realist because he doesn't have an alternative. You know, we're living through an era of extraordinary duress economically. Americans are going to be asking for help at home. And so, you know, he will speak up, but when it comes to, as Hajnalka said, standing up to Russia, China, being loyal allies, assuming more responsibility in Eastern Europe, or, you know, a peacekeeping mission in Libya, whatever it is, that will take precedence over pressuring allies on their domestic politics. And my final comment here would be, you know, this is really the job of the EU. It's not the job of the American president. And I would encourage Brussels to get more serious and to do more to push back against governments like those in Hungary and Poland that are behaving in ways that are inconsistent with European norms.
Thibault, would you agree with that this is mostly the task of the EU? And what about the US to help in some way democratic sources, civil groups, alternative views? Is there nothing what a Biden administration can do to support these voices?
No, I mean, there has always been there have always been policies to help and support civil society, political parties, and in general a plurality of view and a healthy democratic debate in in all countries, actually. I mean, this is part of the Westminster speech that President Reagan gave in 1982, and that gave birth to the National Endowment for Democracy, to the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and other organizations. So you will see that as a general policy and a general encouragement to attain these goals. But those will not be. I do agree with both Hajnalka and Charles that these will probably not be at the forefront of the Biden the Biden administration direct agenda, direct dealing with Poland and Hungary. I would tend to think that if there is a decision to be tougher on human rights, on democracy issues, the American administration might have more tools to pressure the Poles, simply because the Poles are geopolitically so dependent and economically much more dependent on America to get their own agenda. And I think that's why the authorities in Warsaw are very concerned about, or were very concerned about, the election and how it went. On the other hand, in Budapest, I think Viktor Orbán has engaged into a very Gaullist exercise of trying to bring in a lot other actors. He befriended Vladimir Putin in the past. We know that there are some Chinese investments that have come in for the Belgrade Budapest railroad link. Huawei has recently opened an R&D center in Budapest, also in Rome, by the way. So it's not, it's not only a question of Hungary here, but I mean, this is where there might be some additional tensions here, but at the same time, it gives Viktor Orbán more leeway in his relationship with Joe Biden. He can also say, if you talk to me too much about the rule of law and democracy, I will buy more Chinese goods. And at the end of the day, I completely agree with Charles that this is a European thing. Europeans need to sort this out, and I think there is also a debate to be made, a really serious debate in Central Europe about whether Poland is West European, or whether they want to build their Three Seas empire, as some people inside the, not everybody, but some people inside the peace administration seem to think, and the same about Hungary. I mean, I think there needs to be a debate in Western Europe about finally understanding that these countries should be treated as equals, and there should be a debate in Central Europe about the nature of their belonging to Europe and whether they want to belong to the Union. I mean, as simple as that. I think the elites that are currently in power in Budapest and in Warsaw might have a very different opinion about that than their own people. So it will be interesting to see how that debate goes.
Very good. Veronica, before you have to leave, any comments on that, especially the role of the US?
Yeah, please. Actually, I would like to perhaps conclude with a question to the panelists as well. How effective will this be? I mean, we all seem to agree that this could rain very high on the Biden agenda. I tend to think that it's going to be collateral rather than an actual focus on Central and Eastern Europe. I mean, for some reason, sure, but it won't be the reason. And I'm wondering how effective this bringing back values at the center of, let's say, of a still self-interested and self-referential foreign policy of the US would be to actually enact change in these countries, because there's absolutely no question that the EU has an ally back in the White House on these issues. But how effective is this actually going to be is a different question, because the world, I mean, we cannot revert to an Obama era right now. So much has changed in the meantime. And of course, the US diplomats are going to push for anti-corruption agenda and policy that would support the rule of law and democracy like they used to do before it was no longer in their mandate in the last 4 years. But I'm wondering how effective this will be.
Very good. May I add to this last question? My own problem, which many of you talked about, a sort of new era, no way back to the Obama period. Will we have a sort of liberal order at all in the following years, or we have to prepare for a big power game between Russia, China, and the US, or can we believe in a multipolar but cooperating world for the near future? What do you think? What sort of world we will live in a couple of years after the pandemic? Anybody who would like to start or comment whatever issues have been already raised, please go ahead. Heini, perhaps you, please go ahead.
There were so many crucial issues raised that I'm a little bit at a loss where to start, but I will try. I just noted the issues, and I will try to limit myself to one sentence on each, hoping that it will again stir up debate as our exchanges usually very luckily do. So about capabilities, I would say that there is the issue is to what end and from which source, to me. So again, this comes back to autonomy. So Europeans don't have the same goals, they don't have the same way of war, they don't have hence the same operational needs, they don't have the same specifications. So if they just buy American weapons off the shelf, because that is part of the transactional package, that is like a waste of money in some respect, especially in a political respect. So just one figure, the French National Assembly calculated how much there are huge European deficiencies, even in respect to European goals and ambitions and way of war. The French National Assembly calculated last year how much would it cost for Europe to fill in those capability gaps autonomously, so enabled to be able to defend themselves and take on these operations autonomously. It came up to $300 billion spent altogether in Europe. If Europeans live up to the 2% NATO expectation, it comes from European budget to 400 billion up until 2025, which means that to be autonomous, which is by no means lessens the desire to work together with America, but to work together with America on an equal basis, that would come cheaper than to live up to these expectations. And we all remember that both Obama and Trump administration told Europeans, if you don't live up to these expectations, then we will moderate our commitments, or in the case of Robert Gates, dwindling interest in defending Europe. So I guess that means that I already ran out of the time. So it's just the capability on the capability issue.
Okay, we come back to you, so you might think about the other issues as well. There are so many on the table at the moment. Charles, please, what do you think?
You know, I think that probably the biggest impact of Biden's victory will not be his specific diplomacy and whether he pressures Poland and Hungary and Turkey, even though I think he will speak up, but the symbolism. You know, I think that having Trump in the United States gave momentum to similar forces on the other side of the Atlantic, and that having the pendulum swing back to the political center here will have an impact. It will have knock-on effects in Europe. But for me, you know, the key issues that we need to address are the underlying issues of the pandemic, the economy, immigration. These are the reasons that we've seen far left and far right parties gain market share in the Atlantic democracies. And so whether or not Biden is the president, we have hard work to do in addressing those underlying issues. The other comment I would make is that coming directly to your question, Istvan, the best we can hope for in my mind is a world 10 years from now in which the Atlantic democracies have recovered their mojo, right? Have recovered their equanimity, remain in cooperation with Japan and South Korea and other democracies, the anchor of a liberal order. But I think the idea that somehow that liberal order will be universalized and that the Chinese are going to join it and the Russians are going to join it. I mean, this is a pipe dream. So what I would aim at is a kind of increasingly multipolar world, but one that remains anchored at its core by a cooperative community of democracies whose liberal traditions and institutions are consolidated. Because right now, those liberal institutions and traditions are shaky.
Yeah, thank you. Thibault, do you see a similar vision regarding how world will look like in 10 years?
So my vision is actually quite similar to Charles, and as you know, you may have understood that from my affiliation, which is not my affiliation today, that I'm more leaning towards the Republican side, and that shows you that there can be bipartisan consensus in the transatlantic community. I think Charles is spot on. I think the idea of a global liberal order is one that is gone. In order to have that, you need to have a global cup, so to speak, that has the capacities to basically be the cup of the world, right? To be able to maintain order everywhere. And I think that experiment did not work in the Middle East. I think the fact that we have a rising China now that is there to stay. I mean, China is a country that has been on the top and competing with the West without necessarily knowing it since antiquity. It is a very strong nation, an empire that has been very weakened for the past 200 years, but those days are gone. So I think, if we are thinking of a global liberal order, that's not going to fly. However, I think, having a West, and I think we need to have a discussion about what the West means. And there, you might actually find more bipartisan, not necessarily consensus, but the possibility of a bipartisan discussion about what the West is and what it carries. As far as I'm concerned, that West includes the United States as the leader, because this is what they naturally are right now, and for a number of reasons, and will be for the foreseeable future, so it would be a sort of tripod. So the central leg is in North America. There will be one leg in the the West Pacific with Japan and other democracies, Australia, New Zealand, and possibly others, Indonesia, Malaysia. Could be the Philippines, depending on where it goes. And then there is another leg, which is on the other side of the Atlantic, and that's us, basically Europe. Once again, I think if we think that we can go and check China each on our own, and each with our own sovereignty, this is definitely not going to fly at national level inside the European Union, I can tell you, and I think we're seeing that already very well. And I think this is a case right now where America needs its allies, and that actually I think Joe Biden has made it clear, and I think that gives some leeway to the Europeans if they are ready to have an adult conversation. So I think this is a moment which we can take to, as Heini was saying, to make the relationship a bit more equal. But for that, we need to get our act together. And as long as we're not getting our act together, which seems to be, for me, the case right now, then that will not be possible. So I think we need to have this conversation about the West. And if Europe really wants to engage in that conversation, it really needs to get its act together.
All right. Maybe my question is a little bit old-fashioned, but there was a debate a couple of years ago whether the EU and the US should become a sort of smart power. Especially it was a debate about the EU, which is a soft power, and the US a hard power. So in different terms, when we talk in different terms, I think maybe it's a similar debate. Do you see a sort of dividing labor or tasks between the two, the US and the EU, how to deal with the problems of the world using different ways and means? And here we might maybe include some other risks and threats we haven't talked about, like cyber attacks, terrorism, migration. I know it's a big package again, but maybe some views what you have, how the US and the EU might cooperate with each other. Who would like to start? Heine, yeah, please.
Yeah, if I may, your question about the division of labor just reminded me of this old saying within NATO that in operations it's like Americans doing the job and Europeans washing the dishes after that. So I don't think that, again, that it is a healthy, I don't think it's a worthy, and I don't think it's a sustainable division of labor. And I totally agree with Charles and Thibault that in order to avoid that unhealthy approach, Europeans need to get their act together. There is no question about it. But here again, I would like to come back to the autonomous issue. Some of us are old enough to remember when European defense sort of came into play with the Saint Malo Declaration in 1998. The British tried to convince Americans by saying that it will be easier for European governments to convince their public to spend more money on defense if it is for European defense. And I agree with the approach that German politicians now like parrots repeating that we are dependent on the US, we are dependent, just to reassure the incoming Biden administration of their loyalty. It's not helping to raise public awareness of defense and security. What is helping is to take ownership of your own defense. And just to go back to Thibault's evoking Charles de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle actually said, and I think very, very rightly, that if under NATO, under the protection of somebody else, member states, allies, get used to be defended by others and get used to the idea that they don't have the ownership of their defense, sooner or later they lose interest in it and they are not motivated to actually do something about this. And so this is why I think that it might be important, although I totally agree that towards China, it is very important to present an as much united front as possible from the West. However, not in the way as it was described last year by István Hegedűs on foreign policy, who said basically that in order to save NATO, Europe has to become China's enemy. I think that Europe has to, I really believe in the commonality of transatlantic interests and values. So I think that Europeans on their own can come to the conclusion, and their policies, even if they are not out of weakness, they would be parallel and very much in symbiosis of that of the United States.
Okay, so Charles, maybe about dividing labor, or what Heine just mentioned, how to put in this concept of autonomy into this cooperation in transatlantic ties. Is it really more realistic now for you, or still not really?
You know, to start off, I would agree with you, Istvan, that there are issues that don't get enough attention that need more attention. And you know, if you ask me, what do I think the near-term most probable threats are to the Atlantic community, it's not a Russian invasion of Estonia. It's cyber threat, it's climate change, it's migration, it's terrorism, it's instability in North Africa. And so we need to have a transatlantic conversation where these issues are front and center. Particularly, you know, I think on the cyber issue, it's a growing concern. So yes, it's time to broaden the conversation. And then in terms of division of labor, I'm not a big fan of it, because to me that suggests that Europe takes over responsibility for its neighborhood and the United States disappears and moves to being exclusively an Asian power. I would rather see the United States stay put alongside a much stronger Europe, and see the Europeans on some occasion do things on their own, whether it is in Eastern Med or Nagorno-Karabakh or Libya, with the United States being a cheerleader or maybe just providing logistics. But I think it would be a bad deal and destructive of solidarity if the model that we aspire toward is one in which Europe effectively disengages from the United States and takes care of its own business while the United States becomes a Pacific power. That's not, to me, an attractive future.
Okay, thank you. Thibault, please, what do you think about these issues?
Well, yeah. So first of all, the idea of the dividing labor is actually nothing new. Back in the 1930s and 40s, when Britain was clearly caught up by the United States, it was clear that the United States was becoming much bigger than what was the British Empire, and the Brits like to see themselves as the Greeks and the Americans as the Romans, and that would be the division of labor. And I mean, you know, this is always, you know, a nice way to present things. But, you know, at the end of the day, the Greeks were part of the Roman Empire, you know, at the time in which the British referred to. And the reality in the terms of soft power versus hard power, there can be no soft power if you don't have hard power. And I think this is what we have learned over the past 10 years. There can be no soft power if you do not have any hard power. So the question is, do we do this? Do we do this do we divide spheres of influence, or do we divide areas where America goes and America doesn't go? America and Europe have a common interest in checking Russia. Although that might change if Russia goes down to hell, as might well be the case after COVID. I mean, it's not a complete impossibility, but you know, in that case, you know, you would have America and Europe together securing the eastern flank of Europe, because it's both in their interests. And then what happens to the Eastern Mediterranean? I think the real problem right now for NATO is not so much in the long term the Russia problem. As long as there is a Russia problem, then there is a capacity for agreement between Europe and America to keep the Russians out, which, by the way, was the one thing that one of the thing that really remains an issue why NATO was made in the first place. I think there is much more problem in the Mediterranean. Let me remind you that America is at the end of the day, America is the peacekeeper there. There is a thing called the Seventh Fleet, and it's the one that really, for the moment, keeps things more or less alive, and liberty of circulation, etc. But there are a lot of disagreements between NATO allies, and I'm talking about Turkey and France. Here there is a clear disagreement. There are clear tensions between Turkey Turkey and France and Greece on the one hand, with Italy not necessarily being on the same side as France and Greece, although this is evolving. So I mean, there is a very troublesome game, and I think a challenge here for maintaining the alliance. And I guess, you know, part of it that would be needed would be the Turks being a bit clearer on what their ultimate intentions are. That's not to say that the French are completely clear and they're absolutely perfect. When it comes to Libya, it's actually the French are rather on the side of the bad guys. But I think there needs to be some clarifications. And I would say that the only way that can happen is by American involvement in this in this issue. And that, I think there is a reason for America to get involved there, and that is because China is getting more and more present in the region. I mean, let's remember that COSCO, which is a Chinese state company, has bought the port of Piraeus, which is not neutral. Similar deals are thought about right now in Italy for the ports of Genoa and Trieste. For the moment, it's only civil ports, but we all know that civil ports can become military ports very quickly. So. That's my thinking about the division of labor. I agree with Charles. This is not healthy. And rather than dividing labor, we should have a realistic look at what's going on in each of the neighborhoods and try to push together to find solutions there.
Istvan, I'm getting summoned by my family, so unfortunately I'm going to have to depart a few minutes early.
Yeah,
I just want to thank you for hosting this and say it's been a pleasure to join Hajnalka and Thibault and you. So
yeah. Thank you, Charles, and see you soon. Maybe in person next year. It would be great. Best wishes to your family.
I hope so. I have to say, these Zoom calls are getting old. It's better than nothing. I wish we could do this in person.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, see you soon, and thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Now, there is a question in the chat box by an old friend, Andre, a good friend, whom probably you all know, who was a famous diplomat in Budapest. Andre, would you mind, I would like to invite you to raise your question or make a comment, and I wouldn't read it for you. If you are still with us and you are around, please take the floor. Yeah, welcome, Andre. Please unmute yourself. Great.
Thank you. It's a fascinating discussion, and glad. I mean, that's one of the benefits, I guess, of Zoom, being able to participate when otherwise it would have been very difficult. But no, I know that much of the discussion is focused on hard power, although there's been talk about soft power. It's often it's the actual discussion has been more in terms of military strategies and NATO alliances. But if we're looking really at soft power and at how we identify with our shared values and try to emulate those values in achieving the liberal democracy that we aspire to, one of the elements that has affected that has been the economy. Has been the challenges when the economy has pushed people out of their, or changes in the economy, not necessarily economic collapse, but even changes have pushed people out of jobs. And when crises have occurred, such as in the US, the mortgage crises and other stock market crises, created huge crises of confidence in liberal democracy and in the EU and in the United States, which again affects our stability and security. So my question is, as we're looking ahead, and given that a lot of the discussion right now focuses on the new administrations and current administrations promising jobs and to get people back to work after the current COVID-19 pandemic is over, and to have an economy in which there will be full employment. And we talk about China in that respect as well, with regard to exporting jobs or jobs being stolen. But if we're really looking ahead and looking at changes that will take place in our society with increased automation and increased use of intelligence systems, which will have probably a negative effect on the jobs that we think of now on remunerated tasks and what that will do to the economy that we have been accustomed to. How do we work together with a vision toward both with building on our alliance and a vision toward an economy that is geared to a different type of work? And I'm being almost intentionally vague. I don't want to presuppose an answer, but what type of partnership do you see in an environment that will be radically different if we're looking 10 years ahead? Maybe not as different 2 years ahead, but there was discussion about what's coming up in the next decade. So I'm curious about this, it's a great panel and a great discussion, slightly different focus though. How do we work together and for security in a very changed economic environment that may be where we can take advantage of automation and intelligent systems rather than be afraid of them? I'll stop there.
Yeah,
thank you.
Well, thank you, Andre. That's very important because we haven't talked about the economy, so it's right to talk about it in connection with security and transatlantic relations. Now, we have only about 6, 8, 10 minutes, so I would like to ask first Thibault this time to speak, let's say 4 or 5 minutes to react to Andre's question, and then Heini the same for you. So Thibault, please go ahead.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Yeah, I mean, I actually think that the economy now has become rather a tool of hard power rather than soft power, because economic warfare is now and geoeconomics are now so important. Well, I mean, if you talk about economics, this is where there is the most to talk about between Europe and America, because they are the ones who are potentially losing out the most from Chinese malpractice of international commerce. So I think this is really a point that brings us towards talking together and finding ways to fight back together against a country that has not been playing by the rules, that does not play by the rule, that will continue not to play by the rules, including monetarily. I mean, there is room for cooperation. That being said, that does not necessarily mean that America and Europe need to be one single market. I would actually say that the West was very good, was doing very well when you had the European Economic Community on the one hand, and the United States of America and the NAFTA on the other hand. What I think here is a challenge, and this is more here. I'm a bit more Europe-centered. Is that Europe needs to build its own not common but internal market, and that means being capable of building solidarity inside its economic zone, so that basically Southern Europeans are not seen as corrupt, lazy people who hide who hide their corruption, and the same for Central European people. I think there is a real need to build one market in which people are conscious in Europe to belong to one one market area and one common, if not country, one common economic whole. That doesn't preclude cooperation with America. I think in many ways it makes it easier for America that America has one person to go to rather than plenty of different actors. It makes the relationship better, and I think it allows us to be more competitive against China, having two strong actors rather than only one.
Great, thanks. Now, Heini, it's your turn. Can you also mention some issues what Andre raised, like how we can change our economic system a little bit, both in Europe and in the US, and whether we can cooperate if we want to face the new challenges of the 20s. But it's up to you how you react.
I would say we should, but I'm not that optimistic about how we would based on past experience. So I would totally agree with Thibault on responding to China's malpractice in economy is something that has the potential to bring together Europe and the United States. I also would like to say that hearing Joe Biden's discourses about economy, I had this I'm hearing some very European-like sentences in it about middle class, about more equality, something that Europeans are sensitive for, and I really see room for cooperation. However, when it comes to switching to a new economic model, or I see that, I mean, healthy competition is going to stay with us between Europe and America. I would emphasize that this healthy competition is always, and maybe this brings us back to the original theme of the conference, is unhealthy as long as it is tainted by the transactional logic, security and defense. And Charles is not with us, and I would like to quote him on that. So security and defense is what determines the pecking order and determines who is in command. And as long as Europeans are reluctant together, as Thibault preconized, are reluctant together to respond to US competition just by saying that, oh, we cannot do that because that would put the whole transatlantic relationship at risk, then they will not be taken seriously as a partners, even in the economic field for the US. So it needs to be more balanced again, but I do see opportunities, and especially with the switching of model that was mentioned. But yeah, healthy competition will be with us. And just to revert back to armaments, I remember a Pentagon official of acquisition saying that after all these fusions and consolidations of American defense industry, they now have a headache, because if Europeans don't have an autonomous defense industry, there is no competition for the Pentagon, so they have to accept the American companies' prices. So competition is good. Having a balanced one is even better.
Very good. Okay, now it's 7:30 and it's late evening, at least in Europe. So I would like to ask you whether any comments is still in the air, because if not, I think we covered so many issues. Actually, we moved away from our original topic, which is good, I think, because that was a very important, but in a way a very specific debate on European autonomy and how the EU and the United States might cooperate in the strict sense of defense and security. And we opened up the debate by the end, and certainly it's partly because we don't exactly know how the Biden administration will deal with all these global issues, what we a little bit touched upon. So what I would like to say that thanks for all your comments and views, and sometimes visions, how the world will look like in 10 years. Actually, this is our topic about uncertain times, and we don't know how the 20s will end up in a couple of years after this pandemic is hopefully over in a couple of months now. We have more hopes now than maybe some months ago that some sort of normalcy will still come back, both in the case of transatlantic relations and in our everyday life, and we can travel and see each other in person maybe next year. So thank you very much for all of you, for the audience. There was little space for comments and personal contributions by the audience. I did not want to focus only on Hungary, to be honest, and I'm glad that we still covered Hungary and our region, but we mostly talked about the transatlantic bigger picture. So thank you especially to you, Heini, for your contribution, both in written form and now, and the same to you, Thibault, and thanks again, and thanks to all of you. We will come back to you in January with another webinar on a different issue, which is not so far away from today's topic. It will be about populism. So I hope you will all join us, and I hope to see you soon. And I think we will all talk soon with our contributors about maybe our joint projects in the future. So thanks again, and see you soon, and thank you for coming. Bye-bye.